Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Campbell County Trunk Show presented by Postmark La Follette right here on WLAF. Remember, you can catch our past episodes streaming online at postmarklafollette.org. Just click on Trunk Show, or you can go to the WLAF YouTube channel. As always, I'm your host, Brad Smitty. And I'm very excited this month to tell you about a new 5-month mini-series that we're going to be doing called The Promised Land. We're going to explore what originally brought people to Campbell County and the relationship between the people and the land here, how that's changed over time, and how the people have changed over time, how the land, how people have went north for work and are coming back now, and then how our economy and our people are adapting and moving forward together. Now tonight, in episode 1, we're going to talk with Judge Greg Miller, who is a local that has lived here in Campbell County his entire life. And in the first part of his interview, we're going to get to know him a little bit and talk to him a little bit about a book he wrote here about the Civil War and a little bit about his connection to the area. And then I'll come back and chat with you a little bit more, and we'll move into the second part of his interview. But as always, as we talk about the people and the land of Campbell County, we want to hear about you and your stories. That's the point of the Campbell County Trunk Show. We want to hear from you just as we're hearing from Mr. Miller. So what you can do on the next page is going to be some contact information. And as you're watching tonight, remember, we, once again, want to hear your stories, and you can reach out to us and tell us about your family. And here we go. We're going to launch into the first part of the interview with Mr. Miller at this time.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to this interview today. We're actually doing this interview with Greg Miller, who's a local judge here in Campbell County and is from the area. So what I'd like to start out by doing is, Greg, if you would just, give us a brief introduction of yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I like to say that I was born and raised in Campbell County, but technically I was born in Knoxville and arrived in Campbell County when I was 3 days old. But my parents were both from Campbell County. My grandparents, some of my great grandparents, and further back than that. I'm not sure exactly how far back we go in Campbell County. So far that I've been able to trace, early 1800s. So I've been here. My family's been here about as long as possible. I've had a relative or an ancestor in public service in Campbell County since the Civil War, and had 2 great grandfathers, I think, that fought in the Civil War from units in this area. Had a relative that was a postmaster. One was county commissioner. My father was circuit court clerk. I had an uncle that was county court clerk. Had another uncle who was probate court clerk, and I've been a judicial magistrate for 33 years, was an assistant DA for 6 years before that. But I've lived here, never lived much more than 30 minutes away from Campbell County. Went to school at LMU up the valley, and then went to Knoxville and went to UT Law School, and then came back here. My son went to the same grade school I did, and the same junior high. High school was different. It closed the year I graduated, but I know Campbell County, and it's my home.
Well, and that's one of the things that we're talking about is what, makes Campbell County home for a lot of people with both of ourselves. I grew up in this area too, coming from Stinking Creek community, and been fortunate enough to live here like you have my entire life. And we know we have a lot of people that have chosen this area, not just now, as we're familiar with, as a lot of people are moving back, and we'll explore in this series, but what originally brought people this area too. And I think one of the most fascinating things, with you, Greg, is, and I'll do a plug here for you, but you've also written a little bit of literature, and we have some good friends at the Campbell County Historical Society, and that's a place that a lot of us are fond of. But did you write a book or anything that you might want to mention?
Well, I did write a little book on Campbell County in the Civil War. I got interested in it doing research on Campbell County's Civil War general, Joseph Cooper. And I started out to write a little article about Joseph Cooper when I found out that one of the past editors of the press actually had a book on General Cooper that was ready to go to print. And he got sick and, in fact, later died. But in that process, his work that he had worked on for several years, he actually traveled to Kansas, spoke to General Cooper's children that were living then. This is back in the early 60s, but it was lost. Somebody gathered it up and apparently threw it away. And so when I heard about that, I thought, well, that's a shame. Somebody ought to know something about General Cooper. So I thought I'll put together a little article. Well, one thing led to another, and the more I found out, the more I was interested in. The more I was interested in, the more I researched, and eventually wound up with a little book about Campbell County's role in the Civil War, and also put together an anthology of my Uncle Ted's published works. He was a county historian, as am I, but he printed newspaper articles in the local papers for some time, and so I managed to get those gathered up through the archives in Nashville and put that together and put that out as a little anthology. And of course, my Civil War book footnotes some of his unpublished research. He was a historian and loved history. He was the former county court clerk some years ago, but he liked history, and so I maybe I got it from him or Dad. My father liked history as well, so they were both very well versed in local history and loved to tell stories. And my father had a remarkable ability to remember names. If he met somebody one time, he would remember their name 30 years later. If I meet somebody one time, I might remember their name 30 seconds later, but if I'm lucky. It's a skill I wish I had, but we would go places and he would point to people and say, that's so and so, and he would give me their entire family lineage. So early on, I was interested in genealogy and history. But I had a lot of fun working on the Civil War book. It took me about 2 years. And this was before the internet. It would have been much faster if I'd had the internet. I spent a lot of time over in the Special Collections Library at the East Tennessee Historical Society and the Graduate Library at UT. They had a set of the official records of the Civil War. Now you could do an internet search and pop everything up, but at that time it was quite a process. And but I had fun doing it and enjoy it, and it's been well received. I tell people it sold like cold cakes. Not a lot of people are interested in history, but I give them to the society, and they sell a few every so often. And I think it's in the local school libraries if they still have their copies, and of course the Historical Society has copies. I can even do an internet search and it pops up. So I've achieved electronic fame. But Campbell County had several little skirmishes. Apparently, the largest skirmish that occurred in Campbell County, I left out of the book. There's only one reference that I've ever been able to find to it. It happened not too far from where the Jellicoe Hospital is, which was at that time, there was a little valley in Jellicoe there, and there was a fairly sharp skirmish with quite a few casualties. And there's only the one reference to it, and I didn't find it at the time I was working on the book, and I sort of intended to do an update, but you're always hesitant when you can only find one source, especially for something that should have produced more than one source. So I found very little to verify it, although I do think it happened. Just to show you what happens, I was given a little lecture at a farm over there, and I mentioned it, and I said, well, I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere in the Jellicoe area. And I listed the description and so forth. And after I got through, this little old man tottered up to me and said, I know where it was. And I said, really? And he turned over his shoulder and pointed and said, yeah, it's right over there. I was almost ironically on the spot where the battle took place. But those are the things you run into. But I had a lot of fun doing it.
All right. Hope everyone enjoyed learning a little bit about Mr. Miller. And now, in the second part of his interview, we're going to talk about a new homeland, and that's the first 2 episodes in this series. We're going to talk about what originally drew people to the Campbell County area. So, in this part, Mr. Miller is going to talk about exactly that. He's going to tell you a little bit about the Native Americans, what brought them to this area, and then also a little bit about what brought the first Europeans to this area. And then after we talk about that early history, we're going to talk a bit about the first industries here in Campbell County, and we're really going to focus on that in episode 2 of our series, which is going to be out in 2 weeks on March 10th at 8:30 p.m. Now, you may remember most of our episodes have been every second Wednesday of the month at 8:30 p.m., but we're changing that up. We're going to be doing episodes about every 2 weeks, and you can see our full schedule by going to postmarklafollette.org, clicking on Trunk Show, or you can go to the Postmark La Follette Facebook page and see the schedule there. But once again, the next episode with part 2 of Mr. Miller's interview, as well as some more information about the early history here in Campbell County, will be March 10th, which is a Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. right here on WLAF.
Well, and that's the thing too, right? I think history often isn't incomplete work. We're always learning more. We can always find out more about it. And that's one of the points actually of doing these interviews is we talk to different people and talk about Campbell County and the history. What we're really interested in is of course the factual history, but also the family history, the people history, and the experiences, that people have that really make the Campbell County community, and all those different viewpoints. And to be able to sit down not only with someone that's from this area and has written books about it and is a local Campbell County historian, which is a great honor for us, is we can kind of get multiple perspectives, the kind of the academic perspective, but also we'll call it the heartstrings perspective, of being here and knowing what these areas mean as just someone who grew up here. And so that's kind of what we'll do. We'll talk about a few of the things that brought people to the area. We've talked a little bit already about some of the Civil War in the area, but and for you, Greg, when people first started coming to Campbell County and settling here, I mean, from your experience, why do you think that was? What drew people to this area?
Well, I think it was a complex process. Like any big thing that involves a lot of people, they do it for different reasons. Some were interested in money. They were looking to figure out a way to make money. I guess there were probably a few that hoped they would find gold mines and silver mines and that sort of business. Others were interested in the natural resources, the timber. They later discovered coal and iron, but not initially. And I think a large number of the early people that passed through this area were simply curious. They asked a fellow that climbed Mount Everest one time why he did it, and he said, because it's there. And I suspect that a lot of them came here just because it's there, and no one of European ancestry had ever been there before. It's hard to imagine, at least for me, the thrill of walking in a place that no one of my civilization has ever looked at before, and wondering what's over the next hill or around the next bend. And they followed rivers, game trails. It's hard to picture Campbell County, what it looked like in the early 1700s, but this would have all been virgin forest. The only way to get through it would have been the rivers, which we had 2 through Campbell County, major rivers, and game trails, because animals were smart enough to know the easiest way over a ridge. If there was a gap, that's the way the animals went. They took the path of least resistance. And they were smart enough to know if you come to a river, where the places are that you can ford the stream and get across. So if you follow the game trails, you automatically had the easiest way to go. But Campbell County in that day would have been a massive forest of enormous trees. It would have been in the woods, twilight, even at noon. There would have been very little undergrowth because it would have been killed out by the shade of these massive trees. And at that time, about 1 in every 4 trees in East Tennessee was an American chestnut. And those chestnuts provided the biomass for the large animals, such as the elk and the mountain bison. which were both very common in this area, but they fattened up on chestnuts. And that's how they survived these long winters. Unfortunately, when the blight wiped the chestnuts out in Campbell County in the mid 1930s, the oaks replaced them, and they simply don't produce the necessary biomass. They're not as fattening as a chestnut. They came and they searched and they looked and they found this marvelous land that was untouched and untapped, and some of them saw opportunity immediately. Some of them acquired large tracts of land and wanted to settle it. But when you came down through Campbell County, you would have followed what was called the Warrior's Path. This area wasn't claimed by any Native American tribes. It was sort of a neutral zone. Tribes passed through here, some of them all the way from the Iroquois Confederation up in New England, Creeks, Cherokees. And of course, if you go back further in time, there were groups that have no name today that came through here, but they all generally followed this same path, and it's roughly where the old road down the valley is. And then when you go through what is now La Follette, it's roughly where Beach Street is, and that was sort of the original location of the old Warrior's Path, and it went down through what's now Cove Lake. There was a major Native American settlement there that was excavated shortly before the Norris Dam embayment was created. Unfortunately, the entire site is underwater now, except for remains of one longhouse. When it was grass, in the spring at least, you could see it because it was a little bit lower and the grass was a darker green, and it was a rectangle about 10 feet wide, maybe 30 feet long. But now that it's grown up in scrub trees, it's unrecognizable unless somebody points out to you where it is. But there was a major settlement there. Been a settlement where up above where Shanghai Boat Dock is, or well, I'm old enough to call it a boat dock. It's been a marina for 30 years, but up on that hill there's a cave up there that had indigenous peoples all the way back to the Paleolithic. They excavated several burials and several mummies out of that cave in the 1930s. They had settlements all along the river, but when they came through here, it was a magnificent area. Where Jacksboro was mostly a large stand of massive walnut trees. So I don't know why they liked that area, but somehow the walnuts got settled in there. Some of the things I've read indicates that the area where La Follette was kind of swampy originally, and so that was possibly more open. May have been something like a scrubby marsh, but they came here. Eventually established the old Kentucky Road, which went below Eagle Bluff and up towards Eagle Bluff, cut to the right, and went all the way into Kentucky, and all the way up to Civil War soldiers hacked their way through and created passageways and roads and widened things. So it was an enormous challenge, but you can see how it would be very tempting to the first folks. As far as we know, the first organized venture into Campbell County was, I think, the 1750 expedition by Dr. Walker. I think he'd come through Cumberland Gap in 1748, but we know that he came down Powell's Valley in Campbell County, and the Powell River were named for one of his companions, Ambrose Powell. The Clinch River, according to the reports, had a more prosaic origin for the name of the Clinch River. Apparently they were trying to cross the river in a makeshift ferry, and it broke loose, and someone fell in the water and he started screaming, clinch me. And so they named it the Clinch River. So there you go. I guess if you're the first one through, you get something named after you. They chose one of their patrons for the mountains and named it the Cumberlands after the Duke of Cumberland. But they came through. There were long hunters that passed through the area in the 1740s, but I think the first organized group that I know of was probably the 1750 Dr. Walker expedition. Came through. Surveyors came through not long after that, and eventually it became part of the settlement. They platted it out and carved it up and gave out large tracts of land, and people came in looking for opportunity. Wild game was very abundant. Mountain bison everywhere. We've got a creek over the ridge there, probably in the edge of Scott County around Pioneer, that's called Buffalo Creek, and that was because there were so many buffalo abundant. And if you go out in the American plains today and look at the buffalo, what you're actually seeing are mountain bison. The plains buffalo was actually driven into extinction. It was a larger cousin. What we think of as the massive buffalo was actually the smaller of the two species, the mountain bison. But they were very common here. And as I said, they fattened up on chestnuts every winter. So that's, I guess, a brief overview of how they got in here and what they were looking for. First settlements pretty much tracked with what you would expect. We had settlements around Speedwell, Jacksboro, Caryville, of course, and Grantsboro was one of the major cities back in that day because it was on the river. And they actually thought Grantsboro would become the major metropolis of Campbell County. It's just a small hamlet now, but they originally thought because of its location on the river that it would become a major city one day. La Follette wasn't thought of for a long, long time. It was just farmland, owned mostly by the Sharp family, but it didn't become a city until it was incorporated in, I believe it was 1896 by the La Follette family when they started their coal and iron industry here.
Something that's very interesting about this is how over time, we think now how many people travel to this area, whether it's to North Lake or they travel through, they're going to the Cumberland Gap, or they're heading to Knoxville, or they're coming here. We find still so many people will come here and they'll see the natural beauty and they stay. And those of us that have been here, for generations at this point, this kind of gives us some background into, how some of our people got here. And obviously, like you're saying with the Warrior's Path, it long predates the European settlement of this area that, our names are from, Smitty or Miller. But there's this long history of people coming to, passing through, but yet finding a reason to stay in Campbell County because it does. It offers so much, and it's so much that both people that are here appreciate, but others appreciate too. And you touched on a great topic. Besides just the natural beauty, and the reason to stay is, finding work, finding economic value, right? And a little bit more about that as you were talking about Harvey La Follette. So, once, and specifically, we're talking of, kind of the European and what we know of Campbell County is today with some of the areas that you're talking about, La Follette, Grantsboro, but some of the major industries, that started to pop up here, like coal mining or the ore industry, the coke ovens that you can still see now right at the mouth of the Ivydale community. Tell us a little bit about, if you would, some of those, predominant European settlers that came in, some of the nationalities, but also how it kind of affected the early industry. What were some of the early industries here in Campbell County, and some of the people that found their way here to enjoy those?
All right, so we're going to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger there. And the next part of Mr. Miller's interview is going to be on March the 10th at 8:30 p.m. right here on WLAF, to where we're going to go into a little bit more about Harvey La Follette and some of the early industry and people here in Campbell County. And that's a perfect way, once again, to end this episode, because we want to hear from you. So in this 2 weeks, I'm going to throw up the information here in a second about how you can contact us: email, phone, Facebook, whatever is most comfortable for you. But we want to hear your stories about your family, yourself, and your experiences here in Campbell County. This Promised Land series and A New Homeland is about Campbell County and the people. So what better way than to hear directly from you? So please take a moment to look at this information on the next page. So reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks. We'll see you a couple weeks on Wednesday, March 10th, 8:30 p.m. right here on WLAF. And remember, you can catch this episode and all the rest on the WLAF YouTube channel, and also postmarklafollette.org. Thank you.